Well, thank you very much for that extremely kind introduction. To Jeff Moore, the President, and Richard Mulcahy, CEO, and to all of you here today, thank you so much for asking me to be here today. I've had the great opportunity to spend quite some time here this morning going through the exhibition and talking to people, and what a fantastic event. You know, one minute I'm talking to international business from Dubai, the next minute talking to my friend Peter Darley from up the road at Orange, and the connectivity opportunities here are just absolutely stellar. So it's a very, very impressive event. Thank you very much for having me here today. As I've said, as a farmer who's a politician, we crop and run fat lambs down in central New South Wales. I'm often out and about, particularly in my role as National Senator for New South Wales, talking about water security, the Murray-Darling Basin, foreign ownership, labelling, which of course AUSVEG has taken such a key role in, or farm labour. In all the time I've been involved, I never really thought I'd be here in front of an effective agricultural audience talking about a drug, talking about ice. And I think it's important that if I just start with an explanation of what ice is and what it does to people. And particularly after all the speakers this morning, looking at the diverse range of things that are being presented, it's actually a bit difficult talking about something challenging after we heard from Neil talking about how we should be being positive about regional Australia. But this is so important that we tackle this now. Ice is crystal methamphetamine, the crystal form. Methamphetamine is the powder form of the same substance, commonly known as speed, and crystal methamphetamine is the crystal form of the drug. Most of the ingredients are toxic and flammable, hence the news stories about secret ice labs exploding from time to time. Ice typically contains many chemicals you might find on a farm. Acetone, found in paint thinner, lithium from batteries, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, antifreeze, as you'd find in car radiators around the country, sodium hydroxide, which is an active ingredient in drain cleaner, anhydrous ammonia, which we all know about, which you'd find in fertiliser, and red phosphorus, as you'd find in matchboxes. How anybody can think to put that inside their body is extraordinary, and I think by and large they simply don't know what's in this. After being cooked in an enclosed area, the fumes form crystals. The substance sells from anywhere between $300 and $1,000 a gram, though it is often sold in points, 0.1 gram or 1/10 of a gram. The crystals are typically smoked through a pipe or injected after being combined or cooked with fluid. Some users become hooked extremely quickly as the ice floods the dopamine and serotonin receptors, which would normally make you feel good after exercise or good conversation, giving you a natural high, to the point the receptors become dulled and require more and more serotonin or dopamine to feel good. At the same time, the body ceases creating serotonin and dopamine because it's getting it from an outside source. Ice literally breaks down the pathways between the neurons in the brain. The good news is they can grow back, but the process typically takes around 9 months. In that time, many people are too depressed to work or function, and many commit suicide. Ice users feel no compulsion to eat or sleep and often present at emergency department having gone days without food or rest. Ice causes psychosis and long-term psychological issues and is linked to violent attacks, assaults, road accidents and burglaries. And I'm not being alarmist. I'm a pretty balanced sort of person, and when I started looking at this and got very involved, these are the facts. This is what's happening out there in our communities. The purity of ice has tripled in recent years, from around 25% to around 75% in many cases. The Australian Crime Commission's illicit drug data report in 2014 reports that the median purity of methamphetamine is the highest on record. The highest median purity is in Victoria, 80% in 13-14. You might ask why this matters. Well, it really matters. Greater purity equals more addiction, more violence, and more addict-related crime. Ambulance data shows ice call-outs in regional Victoria increased 198% between 11-12 and 12-13. So for some time it seemed to me that travelling around regional communities, having so many people raise this with me, I was literally travelling around and people were saying, God, we've got this huge issue with ice in our community, that it seemed that our rural and regional communities were being targeted by the dealers. And the recent Australian Crime Commission report confirmed that suspicion. Biker gangs and organised crime are directly targeting regional Australia, including our horticultural regions. The report used the example of Mildura, but there are many others. The fact that the drug itself is so physically small, users typically use just that 1/10 of a gram, means it can be either imported from overseas or cooked in a cupboard or a car boot, and it makes it extremely difficult to stop the manufacture or the transport of the ice. It poses unique risks for an industry, yours, which relies heavily on regional and rural seasonal workers. Often young, vulnerable people, and often backpackers we know who are a long way from home. The spread of ice use and its increased purity has the potential to make it even harder for us to source reliable labour in the horticulture industry. I've recently been told stories of farm employees being on ice. As ice is an amphetamine, it initially gives the user focus and energy for extended periods of time. Addicts have told me that initially 1/10 of a gram of ice would give them energy for up to 12 hours. In this week's Weekly Times newspaper, we read that a horticulture business has taken to testing employees for illicit drugs after suspecting that some contract employees were using drugs such as ice. This illustrates the complex issues faced by employers that go well beyond the shortage of labour. Also in the Weekly Times, we read about orchardist and chairman of Fruit Growers Victoria, Brad Fankhauser, who said he was regularly seeing workers on ice and remarks, "It's foolish to say it's not a problem." There's also the 22-year-old farmhand from East Gippsland who says he was using 5 times a week for 6 months. He's no longer, fortunately, in that job as he had to move home to beat the drug, which he did. He'd also lost a friend who had died due to taking ice. There's anecdotal evidence about problems in Victoria's fruit picking region, from Mildura to Shepparton and in Gippsland. The demographic of seasonal workers, as I said, young backpackers who are often a very long way from home, feeling vulnerable, adds to the problem. The lack of availability of seasonal workers is impacting fruit and vegetable growers, as you well know, a problem that's potentially made worse by drug use in the workplace. So the government announced in April the National Ice Taskforce, chaired by previous Victorian Police Commissioner Ken Lay, and also on the task force were rural health specialist Professor Richard Murray from Queensland and Dr Sally McCarthy from New South Wales. The task force is examining existing efforts to address ice and to identify ways to take a comprehensive and coordinated approach to education, health and law enforcement. It has become so clear that we need a national strategy to tackle this issue. Informed by the task force and the consultations, the National Ice Action Strategy will be presented to states and territories through the COAG process to consider and act upon before the end of 2015. The task force has consulted in every state and territory. I wanted to make sure that rural and regional Australia was a real focus, so I organised a separate set of consultations around the country, doing 10 towns, 10 regional communities covering about 26,000 kilometres, and the results of the consultations are fed directly into the task force as well. So I've been to Wodonga, Dubbo, Lismore, Rockhampton, Cairns, Katherine, Alice Springs, Geraldton, Whyalla and Geelong. And in each of those communities, the response was the same and the issues were the same. I was talking to community representatives, doctors, ambulance people, police, mums, dads, users, everybody right across the spectrum. And some of the stories were just devastating. And visiting one rehab centre, we heard from 2 ice addicts, one, a fellow who'd been a company director for the past 5 years, and the other, a woman who'd been a prostitute for the past 10. In another town, we heard about a brother and sister, young teenagers, who had committed suicide together after being involved with ice. In another town, we heard about a mother who had been found by her two young children ready to go to school, and their mother had died. I was also told about mothers who were using this drug as super mums, to wanting to be super mums, to get out there and be able to do those things they just simply couldn't pack into every day. So the effects of these drugs are simply devastating. And I know that all sounds very, very alarming, but it is true. It is how people can end up if they are involved with this drug. And that's why it is so important that as communities, we recognise the devastating nature of this drug and B, be prepared to be involved in trying to tackle it. As police from all levels across the nation, from local police in regional communities to right at the top of the AFP, and as they keep telling me, we cannot arrest our way out of this. We can't simply look at supply, we can't simply look at law enforcement. It's got to be about looking at demand, looking at education, looking at rehab and treatment services, where the gaps are, what's working. This is an enormous, enormous challenge for our nation and particularly our rural and regional communities. So the government's doing an ad campaign as well as we're now working to this strategy. But one thing that is so clear is that the Commonwealth cannot tackle this issue alone. It is of course going to be with state and territory governments, but most importantly, it's going to be hand in hand with local community. You all have so much influence in your local communities, and it's going to be so important that we get the message out, that you have the discussion, that you start talking about it in your local communities. I've seen some fantastic initiatives already out there in our local communities where we've got towns who are just saying enough is enough. And I'd encourage you, as your local communities, to get involved in this, to talk about it, because it's something we absolutely need to tackle. This is a drug that's not discriminating. It's old people, young people, wealthy people, not well-off people, but I'm particularly concerned for our young people, our next generations out in our rural and regional communities. So please be aware. Thank you very much for giving me the time here this morning. Richard gave me strict instructions as a politician not to bore you to death, so I hope I haven't. But it is a really, really important issue. So thank you very much for giving me the time to be here with you today, and all the best for the rest of the conference. Thank you.